Hey everyone, welcome back to my podcast, The Whole You. I'm so excited that you're back with me again this week as we continue on in our series, The Power of the Mind. If you've missed some of the previous episodes, you can catch them on Spotify, on YouTube, on social media. So you're welcome to go back and view those at any time. We discuss all sorts of topics from brain health to mental health and emotional health and spiritual health and just the whole you and how you can practically apply tools in your everyday life to be healthy and to live out the version that God has created you to live out. So we've been in this series called The Power of the Mind. And today I wanted to talk about fear versus the emotion of being afraid. Because I think sometimes we think that they're the same, but they're not the same. So everyone in your life, you're going to deal with the emotion of being afraid. We become afraid over certain things. There's things that trigger us, and it causes the emotion of being afraid. However, emotion is something that the emotion of being afraid is something that we all face, but fear is actually a condition that you embrace in your life, sort of like doubt and unbelief. Doubt is an emotion that every believer is going to face in their walk with Christ, or just in your everyday life. There's going to be things that would cause you to doubt the goodness of God, doubt the word of God. So those are struggles that you face, but unbelief is a condition. And it's the same thing with being afraid versus fear. If you stay in the emotion of being afraid, what happens is you develop the condition of fear in your life. So, I wanted to talk about this today because I think that there's so many things that is causing fear in believers today. There's so many things, from just world events to, raising your children in this culture, or just you living in such uncertain times and having to deal with the uncertainty, having to keep on pursuing your dreams in the midst of so much unknown, financial situations. I mean, there's so many factors at play that would cause fear in our lives. And so I really wanted to touch on this subject, and it's always my goal to, in these podcast episodes, to be able to really take scripture and show you how you can practically apply it in your life. So like whenever God instructs us to take every thought captive, I would always read those scriptures and say, okay, well, how do I do that practically? How do I take a thought captive? And so this is what I want for us today. I want us to take some tools on how to manage the emotion of being afraid, and how to move on from it and not get stuck and develop a condition of fear in our lives. So what happens whenever you become afraid? Whenever fear is triggered, it begins in your brain. Remember, we think, feel, choose. So any emotion that we experience was first made by the thought that became reality. So whatever you think, that produces the emotions. Emotions are made by you. They don't happen to you. They're made by you. They're made by your thought life. So whenever you become afraid, whenever fear is triggered, the brain sends a signal, and it goes throughout your whole body, and it prepares you for what's next. Your fight or flight takes hold, and it just gets you ready for what needs to happen. And so you have your prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision making, that gets activated, and then it goes to your amygdala, which is your brain's emotional center, your hippocampus. All these areas are engaged whenever you have a fear response, and so they're triggering your amygdala, which is your brain's emotional center. They trigger that, and it decides then what the reaction is going to be. So whenever you have a fear, or whenever you become afraid, that's what's happening. Your brain is sending a signal, your emotions begin to heighten, and you're determining, your brain is sending signals to what your body needs to do and how you need to respond. And so I was thinking about all of that, and because so often we kind of think of fear as one way. So I have to hear something to be afraid. And that's true. You can hear something and it can cause fear, but also fear can be through written information. So this is how your brain handles it. So for example, if you're hiking in Yellowstone National Park and you come across this gated area and it has a sign posted, and you read it, and the sign says, enter at your own risk, high volume of poisonous snakes. If you get bit, you're going to die. So you didn't hear the information, you're reading the information, and your brain is taking in that information and it's signaling to your body what you need to do and what you don't need to do. So I thought about that because we have to watch. If you're a fearful person, if you deal with fear a lot in your life, you have to really be a gatekeeper, not only over what you hear, but also what you read, the information that you're allowing in front of your eyes. So that Bishop Tony Miller, he made the statement all the time. He said, whoever is informing you is forming you. In neuroscience, it's called the principle of first mention. So that means this: whenever I read information, whenever I hear information, that and I'm hearing it for the first time, reading it for the first time, that becomes my context for how I will view that information from here on out. So an example of that in parenting, my middle son, we were riding on the golf cart one day and we rode past this one area and it had a lot of trash. And I said to my son, I said, that's ridiculous. That's lazy. It's disrespectful. We don't throw trash on the ground. There's a trash can. That's what it's for. You take your trash to the trash can. It's never a place to put it on the ground. And so I made that statement to him. And from then on out, literally every time my son sees trash on the floor, his first comment is, "Mom, that is so disrespectful. That is lazy. Who threw that trash on the ground?" Like, he wants to take names and find out who did it. And, my son's very animated. So then he's like looking for cops and he's like, I need to inform the police what's happening. There's someone throwing trash on this ground and it's very serious. But it was interesting to me because I made that statement to my son one time. And after that, how he viewed the subject of littering from then on out was shaped by that one statement I had made. So every time, that's the principle of first mention in action. So whenever I made that statement to my son, that became the lens through which he views that information. Now, if someone else comes to him and says, hey, littering is fine, it's okay to throw your trash on the ground, my son's going to say, no, it's not, because actually it's wrong, because I have a worldview that's been shaped by this principle, by my mom. And so that's why it's so incredibly important as parents that that you understand this principle. So every conversation you have with your children, either just casual conversation or intentional conversation, you are shaping the very worldview for how they will view information or the subject you're discussing from here on out. So that's why I never shy away from conversations with my kids. I talk to my kids about the war that's going on between Russia and the Ukraine. I talk to my kids about abortion. My oldest is not even 7 yet. And people tell me all the time, why do you talk to your kids about this? Let kids be kids. Well, my thing is, your kids, my kids, they are being conditioned by social media, by commercials on TV, by all of these different sources of information. And so if you do not discuss these things with your children, their worldview will be shaped by other sources. So you either have to have the conversation with them now, or you're running the risk of letting another source determine what their worldview will be on issues like morality. What are the bounds of morality? Where does morality start? Immorality, all of these things, sexual purity, all of these things have to be determined by you in your house. And you have to become the lens, set the lens through which your child will determine how they see it from here on out. It's so incredibly important. And so that's that principle of first mention. And so when it coming back to being afraid and fear, one thing that I've done with my kids, my son, my middle son, sometimes he becomes afraid of the dark. When we're putting him to bed, he'll say, I'm scared. I'm scared of the dark. And so I don't just tell him, oh, you know what? There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be afraid of. Monsters aren't real. Well, actually, that's not true. Evil is real. Evil is very real. It may not look like a bushy tail and a huge towering monster, but evil is real. and it may not exist in the confines of the four walls of his bedroom. But evil is real. So for me, it's more important for me in that moment to get my son out of bed, let him look under the bed, let him look in the closet, look in his bathroom. Why? Because I'm showing him that he is the type of person that possesses the capability to, even in the face of fear, even while he's afraid, he is the kind of person who's going to be able to actively look at what he's most scared of in that moment and not become paralyzed by fear, not become frozen by fear, but possess the capability to move on in the midst of being afraid. Because that's how you teach kids bravery. That's how you teach kids to resilience. I'm not going to tell my kids there's nothing to be afraid of. There's always something to be afraid of. As adults, we're afraid. There's always going to be something to be afraid of. Evil is very real. So I'm not going to tell my kids there's nothing to be afraid of, but I'm going to show them that they are the kind of people who have the capacity to move on in the face of fear and do exactly what scares them, even though they're afraid. Because I don't ever want my kids to be held back in life and not do the things that God is asking them to do, to not say the things that need to be said. I don't ever want my kids to not be risk takers, healthy risk, because they are afraid. I want them to know that even in the face of fear, even while experiencing the emotion of being afraid, you can be afraid and not develop the condition of fear in your life. You can be brave. And so that's one of the things that I'm teaching my kids. And, I think about between 1st and 2nd Timothy, Paul instructs Timothy over 25 times. He tells him, hey, Timothy, you have to be bold. You have to stir up the gift of God in your life. Do not be afraid. He says that over 25 times between 1st and 2nd Timothy. Being afraid is real. There are things that we're going to be afraid of in life. But the question always is going to be, am I going to allow what I am afraid of to take root and become the condition of fear? Because we are way more capable than we really understand we are. And we have the capacity to do things even while we're afraid. Even while you're experiencing the emotion of being afraid, you can still move on and do the very thing you're afraid of. You can have hard conversations. You can take the risk and start the business. You can do the things that God has put in your heart to do. You don't have to allow that to become the lens through which you view life. And that's why it's so important, going back to how our brain processes information. That's why it's so important who you share your dreams with in life. What does your circle of friends look like? Because either they're fueling your fears and they are enabling the condition of fear to stay in your life, or you have a group of friends that are fanning the faith flame of your life and they're telling you, hey, you can do this. I'm not going to let you remain in fear. I'm going to hold you accountable to the dreams that God has placed in your life. Do you have friends like that? Because it's so important to realize that we as human beings, we have the capacity and we have the propensity to take our experiences and create a reality for other people. And that's a lot of where fear sets in sometimes, because oftentimes you may share your dream prematurely. You may share information with someone or they may have experienced what you're trying to experience, and all of a sudden they take the failing of their life, they take the heartache, the disappointment, and they begin to create your reality with their failed experience. And it becomes the lens through which you're viewing that information. So I just want to make this practical for a minute. If you're dealing with fear in your life, maybe you're just dealing with the emotion of being afraid. Maybe it hasn't set in as a condition of fear yet. I don't know. But if you're dealing with being afraid all of the time, if you're a naturally timid person, maybe you're afraid of conflict. Maybe you're afraid of taking risks, of doing anything that requires a level of uncertainty. Maybe that's you. Maybe you do have a fear problem in your life. What do you need to do? First of all, You have to renew your mind. We talk about renewing your mind a lot, but renewing your mind doesn't just mean to think differently. It means to believe differently. So whenever your mind is renewed, whenever you continually take these things to God and you continually allow him to wash your mind with his word, what you're doing is you are literally gaining the ability to not only think differently about your situations, but believe differently. So then you can look at the situations of life and you have a different lens by which you're viewing that information. So that's the first step. You have to go back and you have to renew your mind. Find scriptures on fear and begin to declare over your mind the word of God and develop a different lens through which you're viewing that certain topic. And then the second thing you need to do is you need to ask yourself the question, where was the principle of first mention exercised with this information? Because sometimes we don't even realize that we have developed fear. We have developed the emotion of being afraid over certain information. And you have to realize you heard that first from someone, whether it been a parent, whether it been a friend, whether it been a teacher, whether it been whoever. And you have to realize, am I taking their failed experiences and am I creating a reality out of that? You have to ask yourself that question. Who did I hear this information first from? Because they largely shaped the way I view information. So find out, think about it, go back, and then from that point, make a determination to say, I'm not going to stay stuck in the reality of someone else's failed experience. If God has called me to do something, if he's, because that's the thing, we often think of God and the calling of God on our lives as easy. It's not easy. It's not without risk. There is God risk, meaning that if God called me to it, he's going to get me through it. But it does take faith on my part. And sometimes that's what we determine as risk, right? But it's really just, it's an act of faith. And so sometimes we can't just think in our heads that it's always going to be easy, that it's never going to require something of us. And that's when fear comes and tries to stop us and tries to keep you stuck at the level you've been on for so long, stuck in the place of comfort that you've been experiencing for so long, and you never move forward. You never do the dreams that are inside of your heart to do. You never have the relationship you could because you're afraid to speak out. You're afraid of the repercussions. You're afraid of the fallout. And so you have to go back. Go back and ask yourself, who shaped my worldview on this particular subject? Why do I have a fear problem? And then you have to look at your high values and your core values, because those are two different things. My high values are what I think I believe. My core values are what I really believe. So here, for instance, if I say, I believe that God is with me always and I do not have to fear. Okay, great. That's a high value. That's a high value because it's determined, your core value will be determined in those moments where you actually have to walk out what you believe. So if you get to a moment and if right now you're experiencing fear in your life but you go to church every Sunday morning and you say, God, I know God's with me, I don't have to fear, but you're living in fear. What you're doing is in neuroscience, it's called cognitive dissonance, and it's the holding of two different beliefs, two opposing belief systems in your head. And we're not wired for that. As Proverbs says, we can't be double-minded. We're not called to double-mindedness. So whenever you are holding two different belief systems in your head, you're actually causing brain damage because God did not equip us to be double-minded. He called us to be a sound mind, to have one mind, his mind, the mind of God. And so what you have to learn how to do is say, I'm going to take my high values, what I think I believe, and I'm going to really actually live them out and let them become my core values. I want to move my high values to my core values. So if a high value is, I don't have to fear, I know God is with me, well, I'm going to practice that as my core value. And so then when I'm in moments of fear, I'm going to make sure that I am being truthful to what I believe. And I'm going to say, God, I know that there's the propensity for fear here. There's a moment here that I'm experiencing the emotion of being afraid. The fear response is being triggered in my brain, but I'm not going to let it become a condition in my life. I'm not going to let it hold me back. I'm going to move forward even in the face of how I'm feeling. And I know that you're on the other side of it. Because how sad would it be if we never do the things in our heart because we were fearful, because we were afraid? And so many people don't live out their God-sized dreams because of fear. And so I believe that one thing we have to learn how to do is to move forward in the face of being afraid while experiencing the emotion of being afraid, so that it does not become a condition of fear in our lives. So that's what I want to encourage you with this week. As you go throughout this week, as you wake up every single morning, embrace uncertainty. Do something you're afraid of. Do something that you are unsure of, that makes you timid, that makes you afraid. Do it, embrace it, and move forward in it. Don't allow your fears to become the fears of the next generation. That's one of the reasons I am so passionate about doing the things that scare me, because I don't want my children, I have 3 boys, I don't want my fears to become their reality later on down the road. I don't want my experiences to shape theirs in a negative way. I don't want them to be held back because I didn't show them and model them how to move forward even while you're afraid. I want them to know that they possess the ability to be brave and to do the things that scare them because God is with them. I want them to have the core value, not just a high value, but a core value that God is with them, that they don't have to fear, that He is going to be with them every step of the way, and they can do whatever He has called them to do. So therefore, I have to model that out because it's principle of first mention. Parents, as you go this week, what you say to your children matter. You have to remember that you are literally creating the worldview through which they will view certain subjects as morality, as how they view God, how they view His Word, the importance of walking with the Holy Spirit, the importance of church, the importance of community, the importance of godly counsel, the importance of accountability. Those are all first principle things that are going to come from you. And how they determine those very subjects later on in life are going to start with how you discuss them in your home. So I just want to challenge you with that this week. Do the things that scare you. Do the hard work. Go back. Ask yourself the tough questions. Where did I first hear this information? Why did it shape my worldview like that? I understand I have these feelings of being afraid, but I'm going to move forward so I will not develop a condition of fear. I hope this helps you this week. I hope you go forward this week and you take it practically and you learn how to move out of fear and you do the things that God has called you to do. I hope you have a great week. You can tune in next week. We're going to continue on in this series. Love you guys. Have a great week.